Hello there, my name is Dennis Fluer. If you found this particular video, I think it was for a reason. I have a story I want to share with you. I was about 12 years old when my brother-in-law George, who was married to my oldest sister Darlene, came home after a hard day. But George was familiar with hard, having had polio when he was a child and ending up wearing a leg brace that didn't do much for the rather obvious limp that he had. But on this day, he was especially depressed after a business deal with his brother had gone south. George was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. But on this evening, he was obviously upset. He explained that he needed to take care of something out in the barn. When he failed to respond to several calls to supper, Darlene went to the barn to investigate. She found George. He had thrown a rope over a ceiling beam and had committed suicide. Now, I'm sure George thought he was doing everyone a favor, and yet I really don't believe that my sister Darlene or their 4 little children quite saw it that way. It's heart-wrenching when someone reaches the point when the only way to stop the depression, the hurt, the sadness, pain, anger, addiction, rejection, or heartache is to intentionally end one's life. The very act, especially among young people, has such a far-reaching effect, especially on those left behind that ask, why didn't I see it coming? If only I had done something to help. Suicide often claims other victims far beyond the person who dies. So why am I talking to you about this? I doubt there's a person that hasn't wished they were dead at some point in time in their life. When I was about 12, I found myself in a situation where I prayed that God would take me home. Now, I wasn't all that religious, but there wasn't anyone else I could ask. And fortunately for me, I never considered taking my own life. Amazingly enough, I survived. There have been other times when I was so sick or in so much pain that again I wanted to die. But again, I survived. Do you see a pattern yet? Several years ago, I was a member of an organization called International Toastmasters. Their objective was to help people overcome the fear of public speaking. About the 3rd year, I decided to enter one of their annual international speech contests. The objective was to write a talk that was both informational and motivational, something that I felt strongly about. The result was a story dealing with the possible cause and solution to suicide. I found it touched many hearts, especially those that had dealt with the outcome of this tragic experience. I entitled the story, Tomorrow. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you this story, and in so doing dedicate it to my long-deceased brother-in-law, George. To be or not to be? That is the question William Shakespeare posed centuries ago, and that millions of people continue to contemplate every single day. Sadly enough, last year in the United States alone, over 47,500 of our friends and neighbors chose not to be and committed suicide. We ask why. I believe it's because they lost hope in a better tomorrow. And it can happen to anyone. Take George, for example. Now, George is a lot like you and me. He's had his trials and tribulations, his joys and his sorrows, his successes and his failures. But through it all, he managed to maintain a faith, a belief, if you would, that no matter what went wrong, things would be better tomorrow. It was this faith that had kept George going now that his beloved wife Maggie passed away. Now, one day as George was wandering through their house, he happened to pick up an old magazine, and as he was leafing through the pages, he came to a picture of the most beautiful sailboat George had ever seen. You see, ever since George was just a little tyke, he had this dream that someday he would be able to have his own boat and sail around the world. But when he became old enough to do something about it, World War II broke out, and then he met Maggie, and they married and had their family, and, well, there never seemed to be enough time or money to think about sailing. But now there was. George spent the next couple of weeks visiting all the boat shops in his area, only to soon realize that the cost of a new sailboat was, well beyond his financial means. But why not a used boat? A fixer-upper? The search began. It was about a week later. George was walking along the docks near his home when suddenly, there she was, George's dreamboat. Now, to most people passing by and looking at this boat, they'd consider it more of a derelict. I mean, the torn sail, the rusty railings, and the peeling paint. But George, he could see what she would look like tomorrow. Well, it only took a couple of days for George to locate the owner and to strike a deal, but then another 3 months of extremely hard work to finally turn her into an image of the picture in that magazine. George's dream was about to come true. It was early one March morning when George picked up the bottle of champagne, broke it across her bow, and christened her the Tomorrow. As she silently slipped out of her mooring, George's loneliness began to ebb. They moved quickly now out past the other boats, between the channel markers, and into the open sea. There was just the wind, George, and tomorrow. Well, the first day went smoothly, and by nightfall, George was exhausted and ready for sleep. It wasn't until around midnight when the severe rocking of the boat finally woke George from a sound sleep. He hurried up on deck just as a large wave broke over the bow, almost washing George overboard. He grabbed a rope, tied it around his waist into the railing, and began to steer for his very life. Within an hour, the waves had gone from 10 to 15 to 20 feet high. And then George could hear it coming. It was a monstrous wave. The sound, the wind, the crushing power. It was sometime the next day when George regained consciousness, lying there on the beach of this small deserted island. As he lay there waiting for his strength to return, he thought to himself, things will be better tomorrow. At first light, George was already up, walking along the beach, picking up whatever debris he could find from the wreckage. He found some food, water, enough building material to build himself a comfortable little shelter, and he found his emergency kit that had some dry matches. Well, it took about 2 days for George to set up his camp and get comfortable, and then he decided it was finally time to investigate the island. So George made his way up this narrow path, up this very steep cliff, up to the top, where he could look out over the ocean down to the rocks below. Then as George turned to look back towards the other end of the island, he suddenly noticed that there was a large column of smoke coming from the direction of his campsite. Well, George hurried back down the trail as fast as he possibly could, but by the time he got there, it was too late. Somehow a spark from the fire had set the entire camp ablaze, and all that was left were ashes. George fell to his knees and wept. It was over. He had lost. There would be no tomorrow. As the last glimmer of hope faded from George's heart, he thought to himself, in the morning, I'm going to climb back up to the top of that cliff and jump to the rocks below. At first light, George made his way up that trail. And getting to the top, he stood there on the edge of that cliff looking down at the rocks. But then something told him to look up. And as he did, well, to his amazement, there was a ship, and it was heading his way. Well, George made back down the trail as fast as he possibly could, and by the time he got back to the beach, a rowboat from the ship was already making it on shore. Well, George hollered out, "Well, how did you know I was here?" And the captain replied, "Well, we saw the smoke from your signal fire." Signal fire? And then George looked over his shoulder at the still smoldering ruins of his campsite. And then he looked up and noticed that the sun was just coming up over the mountaintops. And he realized that there would be a tomorrow after all. To be or not to be? I have an idea. Let's not make that decision today. Why don't we just put it off until, say, tomorrow? I hope you enjoyed that story and the message that it had to offer. Now, you may or may not believe in God, but if you are planning on leaving this life with the hope of something better, then you do believe. That's good, because there is a God. If you knew it or not, you are a son or a daughter of God. And He hasn't sent you here to return home before your time. Taking your own life isn't part of the plan. Becoming someone amazing is. I have experienced a whole lot over my 77 years. By the time I was 16, my mother had been married 4 times, not counting a few abusive boyfriends. I've experienced heartache, the loss of a child, financial setbacks, serious illnesses and injuries, and the list goes on. And it's not over yet. So is life hard? Sure it is. But that's the point. Have you ever really learned from anything that was easy? When you talk about the things in your life, you talk about the hard things you've overcome. the things that have made you strong, the things you are proud of. If you can't make it over the hill you are trying to climb by yourself, please get help. There are people and organizations all over that want to give you a hand up. Most are those that are there because they know what you are going through, because they've been there themselves. We are literally your brothers and sisters, and family take care of their own. If you need help, call 988. That's 988. And give us a chance to prove that there really is something to live for. Thank you very much. Hang in there. We love you. Bye.